But I was just saying that with the noun problem set, people are struggling a bit because of the nonsense words, right? So I would encourage, if anybody's watching this recording, before they take that test, before they take that quiz, I would encourage you to go back and watch the class from last Tuesday, the 23rd, where we looked at structural grammar with indirect objects, direct objects, subject complements, and all that good stuff. I did notice that for those of you who are here, I did notice that um, a lot of people remember the trick question I asked Joanna last week. A lot of people missed that question. So the importance of watching the lectures, right? So I trust
One
that
of
none of you.
your one of your answers also was misspelled, so it took off partial points.
I fixed that.
Okay.
Yeah, you have a full grade
Full.
in there now.
Okay, full point. Okay.
Yeah, I noticed it did that, so I fixed it.
Cool.
Yeah, the way it grades it's kind of finicky. Um, so yeah, so you guys can always ask me. I think Amelia, you might be the only one who's took it so far. Um, that's in the room, so I won't say much more. Um, so of course there's the discussion post too. So I think you have until tonight to get that in if you haven't yet.
Where I didn't do it correctly, and answer like pick two of them, I couldn't go back and edit it because you can only do that within 30 minutes of putting it up. I just put it in a reply, if that's
Oh,
okay.
that works.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I have been glancing through the conversations, and they seem to be engaging conversations for an online discussion board. So I'm grateful for that. Usually the conversations on them are on in online discussion boards are lackluster, but everybody seems to be doing pretty well with it. So I'm pleased with it. And let's see. And also, one last announcement: I did grade your first Pressy. I haven't got to your second one yet, but I haven't graded your first one. So if you haven't looked at the feedback yet, it's up on there. I don't think anybody got less than a B, which was a good thing. So everybody's on the right track. Uh, whenever of course, we won't do any more pressies until um, probably until close to midterm or shortly after midterm. So whenever we get back to resuming them again, just know that you kind of want to fully capture the argument as much as you can. So try to get a full summary of the argument as much as you can. And then, of course, I want to see you engage with the article in your own words. So really kind of dig your hands deep into the dirt whenever you engage with the article, right? You tend to, some uh, some folks kind of tended to speak a little abstractly. Um, just be specific. So explain to me, like, how did the article change and alter your thinking on whatever topic it was that we read that day? And we're going to be reading some really interesting stuff in the second part of the class. So yeah, just be as specific and detailed as you possibly can. Try not to speak in generalizations. Okay, so that was the biggest thing. But I was pleased with them as a whole. So um, of course I'll look at the second one too, probably next couple of days. The first one's what I had time to do yesterday during my office hours. So everybody's doing good work. So very good. Questions, comments, concerns about any class business before I get started with the verbs? Good. Okay. All right. So if you want to follow along on your own screens, I have my typed random notes on verbs uploaded to Moodle for this week, and it'll be the same format as last week. I'll kind of lecture off my random notes and add to them or subtract to them as I kind of see fit. That's kind of how my brain works. I thrive on chaos. So if you want to pull those notes up as we talk about them and kind of follow along, feel free. But I will share them for you on my screen. So with this verb unit, there's a lot to cover, and today I think we'll mostly spend time today talking about tenses. So the past tense, the future tense, the present tense, the progressive tense, the perfect tense, and the perfect progressive tense. That'll probably cover most of what we need to do today. Just real quick before I do get started, how was your reading experience with the book on this chapter? Was it as I know Amelia last week you were kind of talking about the noun chapter, how it felt like information overload. How did this chapter feel?
About the same.
About the same.
At least that's my personal perspective and opinion. But
What about the rest of y'all? How did the chapter go? Did it feel like information overload? Did you take some good stuff away?
it mostly talked about the tenses. That seemed to be like the most important factor to consider, to pay attention to, whether it was past, future, present.
It kind of really made you think deep about why you use different ones, right?
Right.
Whenever you write, you don't think a lot about your verbs, and so it really kind of broke it down to something that's basic to a deep level on why you use different ones. So that's the object of the lesson today, to mostly kind of rehash some of the key concepts of the book, and then Thursday I'll try to go over the rest of the stuff from that chapter as well as maybe do some problem sets. So the first things first, some of the stuff some of the stuff in the first part of the notes we kind of previewed last week with the noun chapter. But if you remember from the noun chapter, we spent some time talking about infinitives pretty close to the end of the lesson. We talked about infinitives, um, like when we talked about the split infinitive, right? To boldly go where no man has gone before, right? How how those phrases can function just like nouns. So this is kind of a nice bridge in between this chapter and the verb chapter. Whenever we talked about infinitives last week, especially the split infinitive. We talked about gerunds versus infinitives, right? So the infinitive was pretty much the base form of the verb, the base form. So a verb that is not altered in any way by tense. So the verb at its most rudimentary. So A word like go, to go, and if you can put a to in front of it and it makes sense, that's an infinitive. That's the base form of an infinitive. To go, to see, to travel, to study. Um, if you said to studied, or to went, or to saw, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense to your ear, right? That's because to is kind of a forecaster to show that that's an infinitive. That's the basic root of the verb. And anytime you learn a foreign language, oftentimes when you learn verbs, you have to start with the infinitives, and then you can kind of see how all the different patterns emerge for tense, past, present, future. English is no different in that way. Um, I know when I took Latin, I had to learn um, principal part charts, where we put the infinitive first in the chart, and then we kind of mapped out what all the other tenses look like. I don't really have to go too deep into the simple past, the simple present, and the simple future. Um, that is pretty rudimentary and straightforward. Um, Usually, with the simple past, you add an inflection at the end of the base verb. Traveled, ed is usually an indicator that it's a past tense verb. Present tense, um, depending on whether you have a singular subject or a plural subject, right? But travel or travels, depending on what your subject is. And so we'll talk more about that in a second when we talk about subject verb agreement. And of course, the future tense usually has a will in front of it. We will travel to the ball game tomorrow. Right? It's something that will happen in the future. Um, shall, you can probably use shall there too. We shall travel. Um, but will is what you use probably 98% of the time. So that's pretty straightforward stuff, and you use the tense when it comes to the action verbs. Action verbs. Remember last week we had to know what the difference between an action verb and a linking verb was to know the parts of the nouns. So last week we if it's an action verb, a sentence has a direct object. If it's a linking verb, it has a subject complement, right? So one of the things that I would highly encourage, both for the noun unit and this unit, is to memorize your linking verbs. Memorize them. I'm not one to preach memorization, but if you can memorize your linking verbs, it makes the study of grammar so much easier. So remember, linking verbs are usually to be. To be is the infinitive, I should say. Especially it's the infinitive for the first five of them. Am, is, are, was, were. Am, is, are, was, were. Am, is, are, was, were. You can memorize those. It'll make identifying like what part of the sentence is what much easier. Am, is, are, was, were. We were sitting in a classroom together. I would make you all sing it in a little jingle awkwardly. Right? Usually here's a good tip for you guys for very future teachers. The more awkward you can be, sometimes the more your students will remember it. Right? So make it painful for them to sing the jingle, and they will never forget it. it's kind of hard for me to do that on Zoom. But am, is, are, was, were. Am, is, are, was, were. Just say it whenever you're in the car. Um, say it to yourself. Am, is, are, was, were. Am, is, are, was, were. Grow, seem, become, appear. Grow, seem, become, appear. You can memorize all of those. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. And you'll see exactly why in a minute when I start talking about these next few tenses. But am, is, are, was, were. Am, is, are, was, were. Grow, soon, become, appear. Grow, soon, become, appear. Those are our linking verbs. Um, one of the reasons why it's important to know them um, is because this is when we start getting into the participles. So usually this is the present participle. That's when you use a linking verb plus an ing. You add an ing onto the action verb. So I am studying. That's when you write it in that way. The linking verb plus. I have a little note here in my comments. Right, linking verb plus ing. That is a present participle. Lots of times we use these all the time in our everyday speech. Lots of times I'll tell my writing students to actually trim their present participles out and just use straight up action verbs, because I oftentimes think it makes for um, subpar writing to use a lot of these ing present participles with the linking verb. I am studying um, kind of suggests that the reason why you use it is it kind of suggests that it's an action that's happening in the present that is still ongoing, right? I am studying. I am eating. I am drinking. Uh, I am playing a game, right? It suggests we're the present participle kind of suggests we're in the present right now, and that action's still ongoing. Well, you can kind of see how that's a little redundant, right? Because if you're in the present, naturally it's still ongoing. Otherwise, you would be in the past, right? So I think this is one thing that we think a little too much about. Instead of saying I am studying, just say I study. I was studying. I studied. I will be studying. I will study. Right? The same meaning gets across. The present participle just adds some verbosity to your writing. But for this class, our purpose isn't to talk about writing so much as it is just to talk about the study of grammar. But oftentimes in my writing classrooms, I will have my students do a clutter exercise where I make them type ing into Microsoft Word, and it'll come up with all the times they're using these present participles. And I'll tell them to cut most of them, not all of them, but cut most of them and just turn them into a straight up action verb. I oftentimes think that makes for a lot better writing when you do that. But this is important. This is important to know the present participle because it'll inform some of these other moods that we'll do in a second. The past participle, the formula for that is you always have a have or had, then you have a verb, then you add ed to the verb. So it's kind of like have had past tense verb, pretty much. Past tense action verb, that is. Um, I had traveled to Atlanta last year to watch the Braves and Mets. So had, notice the formula, had traveled to Atlanta last year to watch the Braves and Mets. I had eaten Taco Bell yesterday, giving me stomach aches. So I will. Um, let's see. Beat is one that that is a regular. Well, I'll skip over that. So that's usually the common formula. You have or had main verb plus ed, unless it's one of these irregular verbs. Travel is a regular use of the past participle. Um, Now we have a lot of now verbs in our language that don't follow that pattern, that have an irregular form of the past participle. And I have like a nice little list here of some of them, and some of them were in the sentences I have here. So catch, um, whenever you the verb catch is irregular because you didn't say you don't make it an ed to say I catched the ball. You say I caught the ball, and to turn that into a past participle, you would think, okay, wouldn't you need to put an ed at the end of the verb? I had catched the ball. Again, no. You don't even make the regular past tense catched. Uh, I had caught the ball. Um, the verb hit. I hit the ball. Um, to hit is the basic infinitive. Um, Past tense. You wouldn't say I hitted the ball. You would say talking about baseball, right? Babe Ruth hit the ball. Well, Babe Ruth is dead, right? He's been dead since the 1950s. So, but whenever we're talking about an event in the past, Babe Ruth hit his 714th home run, setting an MLB record for years. Um, we use the verb hit as the simple past tense as well as the infinitive. So that's definitely a different one. Again, we wouldn't, for the past participle, we wouldn't say I hitted the ball. I had hitted the ball. Babe Ruth had hitted the ball. No, that doesn't make any sense. That sounds horrible to your ear. You would say Babe Ruth had hit the ball. Buy, you wouldn't say I bought it. Um, Maybe you would in this area. I think that's kind of a dialect thing. I've heard people say that before. I bought um, a new TV today. But technically, the past tense of buy is bought. And again, for the past participle, you wouldn't say I had bought a new TV today. I had bought a new TV today. Brings the same way. Bring and brought is the past tense. Um, the verb have, to have. Um, Usually, have is the present tense. I have a secret. Past tense, it wouldn't be, the past tense is had. I had a secret. Then if if you're using the past participle, you have two hads in a row, right? I had a secret. That kind of sounds bad to your ear, right? That kind of sounds a little unpleasant. I had, but that's technically what the past participle of have is. Keep, kept. Using keep doesn't sound horrible to your ear. I kept a secret. Um, but technically it's supposed to be kept. And then I had kept. Okay, and here's one that I want to spend a minute talking about. Because this is one that in this area, it's an epidemic. Okay. The verb see, the infinitive to see. Um, for the present tense. I see the rainbow. Past tense. I saw the rainbow. Um, no, the past participle is seen. So I had seen the rainbow. Lots of times here, people will use in this dialect in Appalachia, people will use seen, the past participle, as the simple past. I seen the rainbow. Lots of people in this area will do that. Have you guys heard that before? People saying I seen the as a typical past tense. I seen the rainbow. I'm not. I see. I saw it. You put your finger up there. What about some of the rest of you all? Uh, Amelia, have you heard that before? People
More
say
often, yeah, more often than I would like.
right. Joelna, I know you're from the deeper South. Have you heard that before? I seen it rather than I saw it. Maybe she stepped out. What about you, Maggie? Have you heard I seen it rather than I saw it?
I'm not from the South, but I am from a very like rural country area, so I have heard that before.
Heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that I have seen all the time in student writing that I've graded. I wrote when I taught at WVU in Morgantown. I had lots of um, variety of students from all over the world there. But when I moved back to Southern West Virginia, both at the community college job I used to have, and as well as here at Bluefield State, I see that people using that one wrongly all the time. Um, pe- People often write like they speak, and I think when people speak, they I think it's just a linguistic habit to leave that had off. It's just something our brains just do. Right? We lots of times we omit stuff that should be there to kind of take a shortcut in speech. Well, when people write, lots of times they write like they speak, and those shortcuts that we take, leaving that had off the scene before the scene, um, people still take those shortcuts. So this is a way that spoken English kind of sort of butts its head into written English. So we always have to make a distinction. The reason why we leave that had off the scene is that's a grammar one thing, right? That's just something that our brains just naturally do. Well, when it comes to correct prescriptive grammar, that's not something you should do. So yeah, that's one that I see all the time. I keep using see in a sentence when talking about this. I don't mean to do that as a pun. Fall, fail is the to fall. Adam and Eve fail. Adam and Eve had fallen in the garden, right? This is one where you add the en at the end to make it a past participle. Write, to write. Mark Twain wrote Tom Sawyer. Mark Twain had written Tom Sawyer. Drive, to drive. Dale Earnhardt drove a car in NASCAR. Dale Earnhardt had driven a car in NASCAR. To speak. Cicero spoke to the Roman Senate. Cicero had spoken to the Roman Senate. To do. I did a crossword puzzle today. I had done a crossword puzzle today. Sneak. I sneaked into a bar before I was 21. Then I had snuck into a bar before I was 21. So lots of irregular verbs. So I gave you guys the pattern up here for past participle. Have, had, main verb, and ed. Well, I just gave you a list of a fairly substantial list of a bunch of different irregular verbs that don't follow that pattern. So this is one reason why that the English language is maddening for someone who is trying to learn it as a second language, right? Because we have so many exceptions to the rule. Again, the reason why we have that many exceptions has to do with how our language developed. The reason why I gave you that lesson on Old English, Middle English, Modern English in the first week of class was to kind of give you guys a sort of some linguistic history there. Some of these irregular verbs were part of the Old English. The Old English didn't really have a lot of rhyme or reason to it. But when the French invaded England, the Norman Conquest, and the French language gradually started changing our English language started getting more rules because French is even a language that came out of Latin, and Latin's a language that has a lot of rules. But there's these old verbs that still stuck around from the Old English period, still did their own thing that didn't follow these rules. So a verb like we would have to look it up in the OED, but a word like travel was probably a word that didn't originate in Old English. It was probably a French word that got introduced into our language. So the regulars, words that were introduced into English, the irregulars are verbs that were part of the original English but didn't change with changes to the language. This is us still hanging on to a trend from 1,000 years ago. That's why we have all these irregulars. So let me just pause real quick here before I continue. Questions about that? Azad, I want to ask you, how is it with all these irregular verbs with you? Is this something that you had a hard time with learning English?
Um, to be really honest, no, just because I feel like we started learning like all of this since primary or elementary.
Right.
So it's something that we are quite familiar, or like I am personally quite familiar with. So yeah. It's just that sometimes I feel like because we started learning this since we were young, so we know how to do it in terms of like we know how it sounds and everything. It's just that we do not know the explanation behind it. So now I think it's a little bit clearer on why we use this and that. Yeah.
So my explanation of how the irregulars came from Old English and the regulars came from French and Latin, that probably makes a lot of sense to you now after I said that. Good. What about some of the rest of you all? Do the sheer amount of irregulars, does that kind of confuse you in a way, or is it something that you've just naturally trained your brain to do as a native English speaker? What do you all think?
I feel like it's natural for me personally, but I mean, that's just speaking for myself.
Right. So you wouldn't, if you said I drove rather than I drived, right? You naturally would say I drove.
Right, yeah. Yeah. I do my best to, I don't know, I've always kind of tried to speak in a way that is proper. So,
Some of these we can make the argument that it sounds fine if you don't say it properly. Like I drived down the road. Um, does that really sound ghastly to your ear to say that? I drive down the road. Um, it doesn't really to mine.
it kind
Maybe
of does for me.
it does
It,
sound it does sound bad to you,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not judging anyone, like, teach their own, but I don't know. I just, for me personally, I couldn't, yeah, I
instead of
wouldn't.
fail, I fell down the stairs. What if you say I falled down the stairs?
Makes you sound really hick. Like
Yeah.
You sound
very,
hick, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I bought bananas at Kroger yesterday. I bought bananas at Kroger yesterday. So am I still sounding hick and saying those? I
Yeah.
bought, right? And so maybe this is a dialect thing. Why some of them, of course, I'm from this area originally, so maybe that's why it doesn't sound so ghastly to my ear. But I think even in my everyday speech, I would still say the um, the correct one. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people just use the ed and kind of throw the correct past tense out the window. I catched the ball versus I caught the ball. You can make the argument, but you guys it sounds like a lot of you guys have a more refined ear.
It's something that I would have heard. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if someone back home was saying. Like, it doesn't sound that absurd.
Right? Yeah, like if you were just having an everyday conversation with somebody, right? As they said, I catch the ball instead of I caught the ball. Probably wouldn't think anything of it, right? I sneaked into the bar versus I snuck into the bar. Yeah, it maybe just depends on where you grew up and what your ear is used to. I would have to. I should just as a linguistic experiment, I should just have my mother come to this class sometime because she said does all this stuff we're talking about. So I should have her visit one day. So the next concept I want to go over before we get to the progressive and the perfect is just simply subject-verb agreement. This, whenever we're talking about subject-verb agreement, we're mostly just talking about simple past, simple present, simple future. We're not really talking about participles here. But this is often a grammar mistake that students will do wrong in their writing, and this is oftentimes too a question that will show up in a lot of grammar quizzes or even standardized tests. So you kind of have to think a little bit. So first sentence: Jeff consumes a lot of pumpkin spice lattes in October. Well, so you might ask yourself, should I add the S to consume or not? To consume, that's the infinitive. When do you add an S and when do you not? Whenever the subject is singular, so Jeff in this case, I'm just one person, right? So the subject is singular. So for the simple present tense, that's when you add the S on, whenever the subject is singular. If I was writing using another sentence using that verb, notice here the subject is plural. We're not talking about one student, we're talking about multiple students. So the students consume a lot of coffee during finals week. So whenever you have a plural subject, you leave the S off and you just have the basic infinitive for your verb. So in this way, the subject and the verb have to agree. If you said Jeff consume a lot of pumpkin spice lattes in October, or the students consumes a lot of coffee during finals week, even the ear test will even tell you that sounds. The ear test is not a reliable test because you can get mixed up in dialect with the ear test. But even the ear test will tell you that that is incorrect. The students consumes or Jeff consume. So the rule there is singular subject, add the S, plural subject, leave the S off. With linking verbs, you kind of have to deal with is and are and was and were, right? So for agreement. So instead of saying they was present at the student government meeting, we have they. That's a plural subject. In common, so we're talking about more than one person here. We'll talk about how pronouns are getting way more complicated in our language next week. But in this case, we're talking about more than one person, right? So they were present at the SGA meeting. So you wouldn't say they was. Even your ear test will tell you that's wrong. You'd say they were. But if you said, I'll just make a note here, incorrect, correct. But if you said Bob was present at the SDA meeting, Bob is one person, right? So you use was for one person instead of were. Were is for multiple people. For is and are, Jeff is an English professor at Bluefield State. Jeff, Bonnie, Dockar, Mark, Sarah, and Mike are English professors at Bluefield State. So in this one, I list all the English professors at Bluefield State, right? So plural subject, use are rather than is. So, so that's the basic rule. Whenever we talk about pronouns next week, we'll complicate that rule a little bit because there's lots of pronouns that are called indefinite pronouns that make subject-verb agreement a little harder. But right now, we're mostly just concerned about the basics of subject-verb agreement, and so that's how we do it. And for is and are, singular with is, plural with are, or was and were, singular with was, plural with were, with common action verbs, s with singular, no s with plural. So I think that concept's easy enough. I think it's easy. I think that's a little easier of a concept again, just because of the ear test. The ear test usually will not fail you on that one. So here's where things are going to start getting a little more complicated, and that's when we talk about the progressive and the perfect. And I think I have enough time to get through this. So the progressive. So now we're not talking about tense is when we talk about past, present, or future. Now we're talking about mood. Okay. So the progressive mood of a verb, it allows us to describe actions as backgrounds to other actions or an action that is in progress. So in the form of the structural grammar it takes, you have be, the be plus time. That means, is it the time part means, is it is or was it, or is it was or were? Is or are for the present, was or were in the past. So that's what that means. Be versus be plus time. Plus the present participles. Remember the present participle, you add ing on to the action verb with a linking verb. So linking verb, be plus time. That pretty much means a linking verb based on, is it past or present, and along with the present participle. So you can kind of see with these examples I'm going to give you why you would write it this way. As I speak, Mary is writing her letter. I'll say that should be letter of resignation. So while I'm talking right in this moment, we are currently in the present. As I'm speaking right here in the present, Mary, at the same exact time, is writing her letter of resignation. So I'm doing something in the present. She's doing something while she is doing something in the present. So that's why we use this what we call the progressive tense. It shows that as you're doing something, somebody else is doing something. When Pat arrived home, the children were playing quietly. So now we're talking about the past. We're talking about a specific moment in the past. So at that moment that Pat arrived home, right at that moment, the children were playing quietly. So when one thing happened, the other thing was happening right alongside it. This is the future progressive. When the summer arrives, Jeff will be sleeping to noon every day. So when that day comes, on that day, when it gets here, I will be sleeping to noon every day. So the future progressive is kind of a conditional. When this happens, that will happen too. So, but notice the pattern, right? A linking verb plus ing. The linking verb is based on your past, present, or future. That's suggesting that while something is happening, another thing is happening right at the same time. We can have a big philosophy debate about we could have a nice philosophy debate about whether there is a such thing as the present, because as soon as you think to yourself, this is the present, it's the past already, right? That's a debate in philosophy class if you take me for philosophy class. But the grammar thinks so, that there's an actual present. As we're doing this, this is happening too. When we did this, that happened at the same time. So that's why we use the progressive mood. So a very detailed explanation here for something that you guys probably just took for granted is English speakers. So this example, the boys, then we're taking the infinitive study, to study Spanish. So simple present, the boy studies Spanish. We add the S on because it's one boy, right? Simple past, the boy studied Spanish. Future, the boy will study Spanish. Then when we're talking about the progressive, the boy is studying Spanish. Progressive past, the boy was studying Spanish. The progressive future, the boy will be studying Spanish. So that's the progressive mood in a nutshell. So before I move on to the perfect, let me just stop and ask, is this clear why you used progressive? Did I lose you at any point? Amelia, you're good. Whenever I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the thumbs ups. So
Use our words.
use your words, right? So you're good. You feel good about it, Amelia? That the reason why we use progressive.
Yes, I do personally. Not saying that I'll never make a mistake, because hey, we're all human.
What about some of the rest of you guys? Maggie, Joanna, Azat, you guys feeling good?
Good for me as well.
Good, good. Yeah, it's a little, again, the study of grammar, it kind of makes your head swim sometimes just because you're thinking deeply about something you take for granted. That's what makes your head swim with this subject. So let's talk about the perfect now. The perfect. So I say here an action with a later action. And the way that the perfect is constructed, um, have plus time, I'll say plus action verb and time plus the past participle. No, I shouldn't put action verb. Have plus time plus past participle. Have plus time means, are you using have? Instead of defining it this way, I'll just say have or had or will have plus past participle. So an action with a later action. The woman, so we're talking in the past perfect here. The woman had left by the time her sister arrived. So at that moment, when her sister arrived, the woman had left already. Right? So we're looking at a moment in time, but in this case, in that moment in time, something already happened in the past. So by the woman had left, she had left already. I added the word already just for emphasis here. The woman had left already by the time her sister arrived. So when her sister arrived, she was already gone. By the next class, you will have read the chapter. So when that next class arrives on Thursday, you guys will have read the chapter already. To quote the Phil Collins song in this last one, he has waited for this moment all his life. Right? Has is the present, and the past participle again. Remember, you add ed on, right? He has waited for this moment all his life. So that is the perfect tense. When something happens, something else has happened alongside it. Some other stuff. I have lived in this city for 5 years. So my comment here is the action of living started in the past and continues up to now. So I have lived in Beckley for 5 years. I lived in Beckley 5 years ago, and I still live in Beckley today. Another way you can do it is to talk about experiences or events that have occurred in a person's life up to the present moment. So she has traveled to many countries. So at some point in her life up to this present moment, she has traveled to various countries. So that's a case where we use the perfect. To discuss actions that have just happened and have relevance to the present. So I have just finished my homework. So maybe you're having a conversation with your significant other right in the moment, right? You tell them, I have just finished my homework. Maybe you would say that because now you're going to go out to dinner, right? So we can go to dinner because I have just finished my homework. If you're still working on your homework, you can't go out to dinner yet. Otherwise, if you do that, right, you might lose your focus. You might forget what you were looking at. So, let's see. So the past perfect. So reasons why you would use it. Again, remember the it's used. You use had with the past perfect. So one way you would use it is to show an action that happened before another action in the past. So by the time I arrived, they had already left. So I've already kind of covered that one with the above sentence. But by the time I arrived, they had already left. So when I arrived at that moment, they were already gone. If I had known, I would have helped. So in this case, the action of knowing is hypothetical and relates to a potential action of helping. If I had known, I would have helped. If I had known that in the past, I would have done something different. Then, to provide context for events that occurred in the past, she was tired because she had been working all day. So the action of working was ongoing before the action of being tired. So she was tired in the present because she had been working all day. So you guys can kind of see here how the perfect tense is kind of conditional, right? You're talking about events that happened simultaneously to another event. That's kind of when you use the perfect tense, perfect mood, I should say. I keep interchanging those terms. I shouldn't. It's the mood, not the tense. Um, so, how do you guys feel about that? Questions? I kind of went a little deeper into that one than I did the progressive, but I just wanted to overwhelm you with examples. So, questions about that one?
I think that because you've given us so many examples, it becomes clearer, hopefully.
All right. So, Amelia, I'm gonna be Socrates on you.
Okay.
So tell me what is the perfect and what is the progressive? I'll let you close the class out today.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, perfect is let me see how I can define this. It's any action occurring within a sentence or a conversation, and it has a later action. So,
So you're talking about the future perfect, right?
right,
Later action. Or it could be a past action.
right, with an action in general, like depending at present, past, whatever tense. And then so that's the perfect, and then you said the progressive. Um, so it allows you to describe any type of action as let's see, how do I put that without saying exactly what you said? Because I'm just basically reiterating what you've already told us, how you defined it.
Right.
So are you wanting me to give you like a sentence, basically, like one that I've made up myself?
Even if you're parroting me, tell me what it
Okay.
is.
When my children arrived home, they were loud and rambunctious. That would be an example of a progressive mood, right? Because I'm describing actions and referring to other actions, basically.
So give me that example again.
When my children arrived home, they were loud and rambunctious. So like they got home from school and yeah, and they were crazy, loud and crazy. And then for like the perfect tense, a sentence or a perfect mood that I would use is I had reviewed the entire chapter by the time class was over. That would be an example of using the perfect mood.
Right. That's a perfect present, right? Because you're
Right.
talking about the present.
So
That first example, you said the children were loud and rambunctious.
rambunctious when they arrived home.
Yeah, that would be a you're on the right track there, but you'd have to add the word being. They were
Okay.
being
My
loud.
children were being loud and rambunctious when they arrived home,
Right.
basically, and then elaborate on that. So, bum, bum, bum.
Good.
And is relevant to the discussion. Sorry, I'm writing notes while I'm talking. So,
It's good. I think you got it.
I hope so.
Yeah. So it's good. It's good to ask questions to make you. It's good to do that at the end.
Yeah, it is. Testing our knowledge.
Right. So we're out of time for today. So on Thursday, I will pick up with the perfect progressive. So we'll combine the two together. And then we'll try to do the rest of that chapter on Thursday too.
Any homework for until next class?
Nah, just if you haven't finished the chapter yet, just finish the chapter. If not, wouldn't hurt to review it again before Thursday's lecture, just so you're fresh coming into the talk.
Awesome. Okay. Well, everybody, you enjoy your evening and the next day, and we'll see you on Thursday then.
See you guys. Have a good evening.
You too.